Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up daily edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 25th of August 2023. The articles that we shall cover today have been displayed on the screen. Let us now begin the discussion. Modi and G call for speedy disengagement along LOC. Modi Ji call for speedy disengagement along LAC. So the Prime Minister Narendra Modi meets Chinese President on the sidelines of BRICS Summit. Modi says respecting the LAC is must for normalization of relations. This is their first such conversation on this standoff. Now, India and China relationship is something which is always in news. Sometimes with respect to the border dispute, sometimes with respect to the Chinese initiatives to engulf India like string of pearls, sometimes with respect to the sharing of water, specifically Brahmaputra River, and on some other occasions, increasing influence of China in South Asian region with respect to trade relations, with respect to Chinese support to Pakistan, it's always in news. While the matters on which there are divergences between India and China relations are many, no one can deny the fact that the convergences are also equally strong. If you look at the syllabus of GS paper 2 under international relation, India and its neighborhood relation is a part of your syllabus, and it is very important for us to understand the full spectrum of issues between India and China. So in this discussion we are going to take up 6 important areas where there are major flashpoints. Let us now begin the discussion. So whenever we talk about India's relation with China, there are a lot of issues. To start with, we have India and China border dispute. Then we have a lot of Chinese initiatives, and especially Belt and Road Initiative. Then in past 10 years, river water dispute between India and China is creating a lot of problems in the relationship. Then increasing presence of China in Indian Ocean as well as in South Asia, which is India's immediate neighborhood, is creating a lot of problems for our country. But issues which China is creating for India is just not limited in geostrategic terms. It also extends well into economic terms due to increasing trade imbalance between India and China. The high trade deficit which India faces with respect to China is a problem for us. And finally, perpetual strong support provided by Chinese government military to Pakistan is a cause of concern for us. And so we are going to look into these aspects in this discussion. Starting with, of course, with the India-China border dispute. And so the border dispute exists because India and China border has not been clearly demarcated throughout, and there is no mutually agreed line of actual control. The LAC is the demarcation that separates Indian controlled territory from Chinese controlled territory. India considers the LAC to be 3,488 km long, while the Chinese consider it to be around 2,000 km long. And this differing perception of the border is the root cause of the problem. And so let us understand line of actual control in order to gain the full perspective of the problem. This line of actual control, which is used to refer to the disputed border which we share with China. And so when we have discussed line of control which has been delineated on map and have been signed by both the armies, but in case of line of actual control, it has never been put on map. And if you are going through newspapers every day, you know that is the actual problem. Chinese lie claim to a territory which India does not agree to. India sends troops to a region which China says belongs to them, and that is happening only because this particular line or a boundary has never been put on map. There is no agreement between these two countries as to where the actual control should lie as far as both these nations are concerned. And so this particular line of actual control remains ambiguous even as of now. If we talk about its segregation, it is divided into 3 sectors: Eastern, Middle and Western. The Eastern sector, which spans Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, the Middle sector in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, and the Western sector, of course, in Ladakh. However, the line of actual control in Ladakh region does not conforms with the political map of our country which we are habitual of seeing. It runs something like this, with Aksai Chin controlled by China. Although it has never been put on map, but there is some kind of agreement to actually decide some of the points, and that was done in 1993 through agreement to maintain peace and tranquility. Through this agreement, India and China decided to maintain status quo on their border pending any eventual boundary settlement. So, boundary settlement has not taken place, but until then, the status quo will be maintained. Wherever the person is sitting will keep on sitting. But that does not prevent one country from imposing their own perception of line of actual control on the other country. And that is the basic reason why we are having so many scuffles between India and China. But since border dispute between India and China has been ongoing since 60 years, it is not a new thing. Although what has emerged as a major issue between India and Chinese relations are recent factors. For example, Chinese initiatives like Belt and Road Initiative, which is made up of belt of overland routes and maritime road which aims to connect Asia, Europe and Africa. So you should not get confused. Road is maritime in nature, which will lie over the sea lines of communication, whereas belt lies over terrestrial zone and it will be a zone of economic development which will start from Asia and from there it will grow into Europe and Africa. So it's basically reincarnation of ancient maritime Silk Road which was dominated by China. And it is designed to provide an impetus to trade from China to Europe through South China Sea and Indian Ocean, and from China through South China Sea towards South Pacific. Now, this initiative is extremely problematic for India. It's problematic because first and foremost, some of its projects violate India's sovereignty, as it passes through part of Pakistan occupied Kashmir that belongs to India, and no country can accept a project that ignores its core concerns of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Because once a country joins and accepts a project under Belt and Road Initiative, that country is awarded handsomely in terms of loans. But these countries are very small countries with very small production and foreign exchange. And these projects are not able to convert themselves into a viable economic options, because of which these countries are unable to pay back the loans, which binds these countries into Chinese debt trap. What has happened in Sri Lanka? Chinese made a port in Sri Lanka, promising that this port is going to overturn economic situation in China, which did not happen. And hence, China was unable to repay the loans given by Chinese, because of which Chinese were handed over the possession of the port for 99 years, and that is how China is increasing its influence in India's neighborhood. There are other issues because of which India is worried. Since a lot of countries are partnered and actively participating in Belt and Road Initiative, this new trade multilateralism is going to shape the global economic rules. Just like in last 50 to 60 years, Bretton Woods institutions have written down the rules of economy or trade. More and more number of countries are on the same platform when it comes to the global trade, and they are being guided by China, and that is going to create problem for our country. Then the new arena of confrontation has emerged in India-China relation in past 4 to 5 years because of the reports that China plans to build major dams across the Brahmaputra river, and this has again created problems between India and China. So China has officially stated that it plans to build run-of-the-river dams on Yarlung Zangbo, which is a major tributary of Brahmaputra river. But at the same time, China has also stated that there is no cause for concern, as it plans to keep communication clear with both India and Bangladesh. But when it comes to China, things are not as simple as it is stated by the country. So China has been building these 3 dams, as you can see on the map as well as on the handwritten text: Jiezhou, Zangmu and Jiacha in the upper reaches of Brahmaputra. And India has objected to it, but there has been no formal treaty over sharing of the Brahmaputra water, and that is the cause of concern for India. And it is a cause of concern because in the long term, experts have highlighted that even run-of-the-river projects will significantly reduce the availability of the water in the northeastern region and increase the siltation level. So we can say that it is going to impact both quantity as well as the quality of the water flowing down in India. Then in the long term, these dams can be used as a blackmailing tool by China, because control over joint water resources is a very important tool for any country. And to cite the best example, China stopped sharing of hydrological data on Brahmaputra during Doklam standoff, but it was sharing the same with Bangladesh. So you can see how water can act as a diplomatic and geostrategic tool when two countries decide to fight war against each other. Not just that, it is going to cause various environmental impacts as well, because several experts have cited concerns such as increased pollution in the river, potential impact on climate change, threat to biodiversity in the region, and altering of monsoon pattern of the region. And apart from this, it is going to increase our vulnerability to the disasters in the region. After all, artificially controlling and consequent sudden releases of the flow of the water increases the probability of floods, especially in the lower regions of Assam and Bangladesh. So these are the four reasons because of which India is extremely worried about the new construction of dams in upper reaches of Brahmaputra, but China is doing nothing to address India's concerns. Then moving on from river water disputes, we have increasing influence or presence of China in both Indian Ocean region as well as in South Asia. And this is a topic which you have to understand very clearly. And there are two elements to this. First is increasing influence of China in India's neighborhood in terms of territorial neighborhood. For example, India has agreed with Nepal on Trans-Himalayan Multidimensional Connectivity Network, which is about cross-border railway network cross-cutting the Greater Himalayas, which is massive, which is going to substantially cut down Nepal's dependence on India, and hence a key leverage over Nepal will be lost. That is one. When it comes to Bangladesh, China has been aggressively funding projects in Bangladesh. 25 energy projects. China is building and funding the second nuclear power plant of Bangladesh. And apart from that, the Bangabandhu 1 satellite, which was launched by Bangladesh in 2018, was a result of direct collaboration between Bangladesh and China. Then when we look at Sri Lanka, we already know Hambantota port. Apart from that, last year, China donated a frigate to Sri Lanka. At the same time, China has funded the procurement plan for Sri Lankan military, and most of these procurements are going to come from Chinese defense manufacturing industry. Then we are going to have a separate discussion on Pakistan and how it is helping China against India. When it comes to Maldives, Maldives' economy is increasingly integrated with China. For example, 70% of the debt of Maldives is owed to China. Maldives at the same time has leased out several key and strategically important islands to China. And when it comes to Myanmar, Myanmar has deeply entrenched itself in China by signing comprehensive strategic cooperative agreement. Apart from that, the current ruling dispensation of Myanmar, which is constituted of mainly the military personnel, is heavily bent towards China. So whatever we have discussed so far deals with increasing influence of China in India's immediate neighborhood in terms of territorial or land occupation. But what about increasing influence of China in Indian Ocean? And as you can see on the map, these are the initiatives which are taken by China. Starting with Sonadia Port, Kyakyu Port, Coco Islands, Kuantan Port, Port Kiang, Kuala Lingi International Airport, Port of Tanjung Priok. Then we obviously know Port of Hambantota and East Container Terminal Post. Then when we move to Arabian Sea, we have Marau Atoll. Then towards Western Indian Ocean along the coast of Africa, you have Port of Dar es Salaam, Djibouti Port. Then in the Middle East and North Africa, you have Port of Duk, Gwadar Port. So you can see that it seems like China is building projects to engulf India, and that is what is known as string of pearls theory. Construction of a series of infrastructure surrounding India so that to encircle India in times of need, which can be very helpful when China needs to strangle our country. Then a key constraint in the ties between India and China comes from the trade imbalance. The trade imbalance is so immense that India is threatened economically as a result of that. First, let us understand the full spectrum of the India's trade imbalance against China. Chinese import is about 16.6% of all import, but China accounts for about 5.3% of all India's exports. India's trade deficit with China is around 70 to 80 billion dollars. Apart from just the numbers, there are a few crucial areas where India is critically dependent on China. For example, pharmaceutical industry. We know that APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is key for any kind of drug, about 2/3 of that is being imported from China. When we talk about solar panels, there is complete domination of Chinese imports, and our national solar mission is completely dependent on imports from China. When it comes to automotive industry, the key components like chips, circuits, all of these are being imported right now from China. So you can see, not just in terms of value, but also in terms of quality, we are critically dependent on China. And so it obviously begs for a discussion, how have we led ourselves into this situation? And so first and foremost, our liberalized trade regime or FDI regime has allowed the inflow of these products. Then, to start with, Chinese companies were already very competitive with respect to Indian domestic firms. And then finally, the kind of measures which India has taken in past 5 to 10 years are ineffective. So ineffective remedial measures have been insufficient to plug inflow of high amount of Chinese products into our country. But at the same time, the question arises, what can we do about this situation? Can we completely ban the Chinese imports in our country? And so the obvious answer is no. But obvious answer is no because of various reasons. First and foremost, you have to understand that the products which come from China are ultimately very beneficial for poorest consumers in the country. They are extremely cheap, although their quality could also be cheap, but nonetheless, they provide much needed relief to poorest people in our country. If all the smartphones are sold for higher than 40,000 rupees, most of the population will not be able to afford it. And so there is a market, and a big market in case of our country, for mobile phones starting from 4 to 5,000. And that is where Chinese come into play. Then if we completely cut off China from our trade, it is going to punish Indian exporters, as more than 50% of India's imports from China are either capital or intermediate goods. So when we do value addition, just like pharma sector, whatever we export is dependent on import from China. And even if we boycott China, it's not going to impact China in any way, because Chinese exports to India account for only 3% of the overall exports by Chinese. So if they are exporting goods of 100 rupees across the globe, only 3 of that is coming to our country, and so that is why it is not going to impact China in any way. So what we can do to help this situation has already been discussed in great detail in another DNS, as you can see on the screen. So please have a look at it if you want to understand the steps taken by our country to counter China. And then last but not the least, China's perpetual support to Pakistan and its agenda. Apart from its investment in China-Pakistan economic corridor, which we have already discussed, China has always been very vocal in support of Pakistan when it comes to Kashmir issue or terror in Pakistan or entry of India into nuclear supplier groups, or Pakistan stands on United Nations Security Council reforms. In all these matters, China always sides with Pakistan.
Modi and G call for speedy disengagement along LAC. So although we have discussed India-China in detail earlier, it is also important for us to understand the term LAC. How is it different from LOC? And how are they both put together different from international border?
Now, if you look at the syllabus of GS paper 3, under internal security, there is a line in the syllabus which says security challenges and their management in border areas. Now, this is quite an analytical topic, but when students start to prepare, no one is there to tell them what are the different kinds of border which India has. So for example, India has international border, India has line of actual control, then India has line of control or LOC, and then India has actual ground position line or AGPL. Now it becomes very difficult sometimes to understand news articles with these kinds of terms scattered all around. But it is extremely important to understand the differences between them and how did they come to be like that. So in this discussion, we are going to understand the basics of Indian borders. And so let us start by understanding the simplest of these, which is international border. And so as the name itself suggests, it is something, it is a line or it is an area which has been accepted by both the countries to be a border. The country A having absolute sovereignty towards this side, B having this side, and this will be international border. And so there is no ambiguity or there is no doubt as to which place or which location on the map belongs to which country. There is absolutely no confusion over the territorial control as far as these two countries are concerned. Only then it is characterized as an international border.
And so, the best example of an international border in case of India would be Radcliffe Line. Through our knowledge of history, we know that Radcliffe Line actually divided the British India into India and Pakistan, of course, later on, from which was derived Bangladesh. And so let us now move on to the map and do some practical work and try to locate the Radcliffe Line on India's map. And so when we talk about India-Pakistan border, the Radcliffe Line starts somewhere over here, it goes here, and then it ends. Then another portion of Radcliffe Line divided India and Pakistan, which later on became Bangladesh. And so these two are the original remnants of Radcliffe Line, which mark the international border of India with that of Pakistan and that of Bangladesh. If we have to be more precise, then international border between India and Pakistan starts in Gujarat and ends at Akhnur sector in Jammu and Kashmir. And since this is a mutually accepted border by both the countries, it has normal mechanisms to solve day-to-day issues. For example, some person might be crossing the international border, and so the repatriation of that person back to the original country. Apart from that, there are certain checkposts. There are transport lines through which the railways and the buses can cross through. All this available on the international border, normally just like any other international border, and similar is the case with international border with Bangladesh. And so that's why this section with Pakistan never observes any kind of firing, because firing is a result of a dispute between two nations. And so generally this is completely peaceful border, the border with Punjab, the border with Rajasthan, the border with Gujarat. And so that is why these borders are generally not guarded by Indian Army, but rather they are guarded by border security forces, both along the India-Bangladesh as well as India-Pakistan border. And since they allow normal transport of people, and so that is why they also have normal checkposts. And as I've said, since they are normal borders, there are setups for immigration as well as custom controls, because the exchange of not just people but also goods take place from time to time. Of course, since last 2 to 3 years, most of the activities even along the international border between India and Pakistan have been suspended, but nonetheless, they are the accepted borders between India and Pakistan. Now, whenever we talk about the border between India and Pakistan, there are two more components to it. One is line of control and another one is actual ground position line. And to be able to understand what these means, I would like you to go back some time in history, at the time of partition, 1947, and you might recall that India and Pakistan entered into quite a bit of war immediately after independence, right? So when India and Pakistan entered into a bit of war just after independence, and as soon as the war stopped, mainly because of the intervention from international community, a ceasefire agreement was signed between the two nations. Along with the ceasefire line was a truce. And so this ceasefire line, which basically means that the person will stay wherever they are, but they are not going to fight further. And so that is what a ceasefire line is, which was accepted as line of control. Because that is line which might not be acceptable to both the nations, but that is the line which actually on ground the two nations are controlling. So just after the independence, a lot of territory of Jammu and Kashmir, or the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, was captured by Pakistan. Although Indian Army was quite successful in pushing back these Pakistani quite a bit, but before they could be completely pushed into the Pakistani territory, a ceasefire was called, and so Indian Army had to stop pushing them back. And so if we zoom it in, we'll see the line of actual control looks something like this. So you have international border, and then as soon as international border ends, you have the line of actual control starting right from the Akhnur. And so this region of Jammu and Kashmir beyond the line of actual control is known as Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Now there are two things which are important, which you should note very, very distinctly over here. First and foremost is the term itself. Line of control is a very particular and specific term denoting only this particular line starting from Akhnur and going up to Siachen Glacier. And this particular term cannot be used for any other particular section of border of India with its neighboring country. Although it is a ceasefire line, but it has been delineated on map, which means that both the armies have a map in which they have agreed that these are the points which when connected give result to the line of actual control. Not just that, these agreements have been signed by both the armies. Now there is a difference between an agreement on a border signed between the armies or among the armies and from among the nation states. And this is what a basic difference between international border and non-international border is. And so you can say that line of actual control is kind of a practical arrangement on ground among the militaries of the two countries. But having been delineated on map and having been agreed by both the armies does not implies that it is agreeable condition or situation as far as both countries are concerned. It is still disputed. We still show Pakistan occupied Kashmir in the map of India, which basically means that we do not as of now agree to this particular line as international border, and so it is not a permanent border according to both the countries, but they have agreed to maintain status quo for at least some time to come. Of course, it has lasted for 60 years. Where this line is located could also change, or it could also transform itself into an international border. You never know. So after having understood international border and line of control, it's time for us to understand this last section of India-Pakistan border, which is actual ground position line, which is basically the line which divides India and Pakistan as far as the control over Siachen Glacier is concerned. It extends from northernmost point of LOC, which is the point NJ9842, and extends up to Indra Col. Now, if you try to understand it on map, there is a point on ends, beyond which this whole region, which I am shading in green color, was simply not delineated because it is so inhospitable that no one thought anyone could even claim the control over there, or could even go there because it is Siachen Glacier. And somewhere around here is Indra Col. And a straight line connecting these 2 points is actual ground position line. On western side sits Pakistan, and on eastern side we have complete Siachen Glacier to our control. So when we talk about India's border with Pakistan, it consists of international border, with blue color, line of control with black color, and finally the blue color actual ground position line. And so we are left with only one kind of border, and that is line of actual control, which is used to refer to the disputed border which we share with China. And so when we have discussed line of control which has been delineated on map and have been signed by both the armies, but in case of line of actual control, it has never been put on map. And if you are going through newspapers every day, you know that is the actual problem. Chinese lie claim to a territory which India does not agree to. India sends troops to a region which China says belongs to them, and that is happening only because this particular line or a boundary has never been put on map. There is no agreement between these two countries as to where the actual control should lie as far as both these nations are concerned. And so this particular line of actual control remains ambiguous even as of now. If we talk about its segregation, it is divided into 3 sectors: eastern, middle and western. The eastern sector, which spans Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, the middle sector in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, and the western sector, of course, in Ladakh. However, the line of actual control in Ladakh region does not conforms with the political map of our country, which we are habitual of seeing. It runs something like this, with Aksai Chin controlled by China. Although it has never been put on map, but there is some kind of agreement to actually decide some of the points, and that was done in 1993 through agreement to maintain peace and tranquility. Through this agreement, India and China decided to maintain status quo on their border pending any eventual boundary settlement. So boundary settlement has not taken place, but until then the status quo will be maintained. Wherever the person is sitting will keep on sitting. But that does not prevent one country from imposing their own perception of line of actual control on the other country. And that is the basic reason why we are having so many scuffles between India and China. So I hope that this discussion would have cleared some of your doubts related to different kinds of borders which India shares with its neighbors. Let us now move on to the next news.
The next article that we have taken has appeared on regional page, but it is very, very important. Tamil Nadu's request for more water has no legal basis, says Karnataka. So the Karnataka government has told the Supreme Court that Tamil Nadu has failed to understand that 2023 is not a normal water year, but a distressed year. And so Tamil Nadu has pleaded for a release of 20,000 or 24,000 cusecs or cubic feet per second of Kaveri water every day, which the Karnataka has said is erroneous assumption. And so in this regard,
It is important for us to first understand what interstate river water dispute is. Because if you look at the GS paper 2 syllabus, functions and responsibilities of the union and the state, issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure is a part of your syllabus. Then we are going to look into the constitutional provision, which is basically Article 262. Then we look into the act which has been created to resolve the interstate river water dispute, what are the problems, and the bill that has been tabled to resolve the problem will also be discussed.
Acting on the powers provided by the Constitution, the central government has enacted Interstate River Water Disputes Act. There are certain issues in the existing framework which ask for a new act which the government has brought. Let's understand those issues. Now, first of all, in the existing framework, there is a lack of negotiation mechanism, which means that as soon as a dispute arises between two states, for example, in this case between Goa and Karnataka, there is no institution which first tries to dissipate the stress or the tension by negotiating or by initiating that negotiation. So as soon as a dispute arises, it leads to demands for setting up of tribunals. And it also leads to acrimony among those states and their peoples. Now, in the existing framework, there are a lot of delays. Now, these delays arise due to two main reasons. Now, first is the delay in setting up tribunal. Under the existing Act of 1956, the central government is authorized to set up a tribunal in each and specific dispute among the states. So, for example, if there is a Kaveri dispute, there shall be a Kaveri River Tribunal, and similarly, there will be a Mahadai River Tribunal as well. So, as soon as these states, for example, in this case, Goa, approaches the central government for setting up of a tribunal, the central government takes a lot of time in setting up that tribunal. In the case of Mahadai river water dispute, only after the intervention of Supreme Court did the central government form tribunal in 2018, but this dispute has been going on since many decades. After the setting up of tribunal itself takes a lot of time in giving the award. After the tribunal has given the award has to be notified by the center. And again, central governments take a lot of time in such a notification. For example, in case of Kaveri water dispute, the tribunal gave its award in 2007, but only in 2013 that the award was notified. After the award has been notified, there has been a lot of instances where states have rejected the award and refused to obey the orders of the tribunal. So we can say that there are loopholes in the present framework which allow for non-adherence as well as rejection of the award. The case in point can be the rejection of Ravi Vyas Tribunal Award by Punjab government. One of the very important issues in the current framework is the data inadequacy. For example, the current framework does not provide for an institution which takes care of gathering, maintaining and dissipation of a data. So for example, the fluctuation in the level of water in a river takes place throughout the year and year on year. So there needs to be a maintenance of data for such water flow or discharge in the river to enable a better calibration of the award, and there is no such institution currently in India. So taking into account all these loopholes in the current framework of the Act, the government has come up with an amendment, and let's understand each provision of the bill to see how it improves upon the current framework. The important provisions of the bill have been displayed on the screen. To start with, it provides dispute resolution committee. Now, if you remember that in the existing framework, there is a lack of negotiation mechanism. And the first thing that this bill does is to provide for dispute resolution committee, which shall have a mandate of 1 year, and it shall try to bring all the stakeholders to the dispute on a table and try to resolve any dispute. Now, at the end of 1 year, extendable by 6 months, if there is no agreement between the stakeholders, only then the case shall go to the tribunal. Now, a watershed change from the current scenario is the constitution of a permanent tribunal. Now, it is important to understand that in the current act, There is no permanent tribunal, and for each and every river water dispute, there needs to be set up a separate tribunal, and hence the constitution of permanent tribunal will cut down the delays in setting up of tribunal. So this delay is addressed by permanent tribunal. Now this tribunal shall consist of experts as well as judicial members. Now in place of multiple tribunals as provided by the current framework, the bill provides for multiple benches which will deal with each and every river dispute. The issue of delays has been taken care by including a time bound manner clause. So it will be mandatory for the tribunal to provide the award within the period of 2 years, and which can be extended only by 1 year. So now it is a statutory obligation to provide an award within a period of 1 year. So these delays have been taken care by this provision. Now as far as the delays in notification and the finality of the final award is concerned, the bill provides that the award given by the tribunal shall be final and binding, and there cannot be any escape from that. And it also obviates the need for any kind of notification by the central government. So as we just saw that the substantial amount of delay used to occur at the notification level, and since now there will be no need for notification, there will be no delay. Now as far as the data collection is concerned, that has been addressed by authorizing central government to form an agency or give a contract to any agency for maintenance of a data bank regarding fluctuating levels of water in the river. So after understanding how Interstate River Water Dispute Bill 2019 addresses the issues plaguing the current framework, let's now understand what the Mahadayi River Dispute is all about.
Same-sex couple, court asks women parents to undergo counseling. So the Delhi High Court has ordered the director of a shelter home to provide counseling to parents of a 22-year-old lesbian woman to prepare them to accept their daughter as per her wishes. Now, as we already know that Supreme Court has decided to examine the petitions to allow solemnization of same-sex marriage under the Special Marriage Act, which provides a civil form of marriage for couples who cannot marry under their personal laws. And so currently, people who have same sex cannot marry under any of the religious personal laws that exist in our country. And so the only recourse they have is a Special Marriage Act. Just like when people belonging to different religion have to marry, they can only marry it through a Special Marriage Act. And so a lot of petitions were filed in the Supreme Court to allow them to marry under Special Marriage Act, against which the union government stands now in its affidavit. And the main contention has been Article 14, which provides for equality before the law, but also provides for equal protection of the law, which provides for reasonable classification, which is basically categorizing people into different groups and treating them differently. And so the argument of the government is that marriage between biological male and biological female is different from a marriage between a biological male and biological female, and hence these people cannot claim equality in demanding the marriage rights in our country as compared to the male and female. And this is what is known as the concept of intelligible differentia. There is a differentiation between these two forms of union, and since these two forms of union are different, they have to be treated differently, and that is what equal protection of the law is. Because after all, equal protection of the law means that all persons in similar circumstances shall be given the same rights and liability. And so it essentially means that equals are to be treated equally, and there must be no discrimination amongst them. And since these two kinds of unions are not equal, that is what the argument of the government is. But as of now, the Supreme Court has referred this matter to higher judge bench. But nonetheless, it calls into question the rights and the issues being faced by the LGBTQ community in our country. And so first we are going to look at the challenges they are facing right now, and then what are the important Supreme Court judgments in this regard. So when we talk about the issues related to LGBTQ community, the issues can be segregated into 5 main headings. Lack of data and basic research, which is a basic problem. Marginalization and social exclusion related to stereotype and stigma, educational exclusion, economic deprivation, and finally the legal injustice or lack of justice to the LGBT community. So when we talk about lack of data and basic research, this is a fundamental problem in dealing with most of the vulnerable sections. Because if you do not have the proper data, and if you do not have research and statistics about this population belonging to LGBTQ community, how are you even going to formulate a policy? And finding empirical data on, let's say, economic, health, family, and other outcomes of LGBTQ people is complicated by several challenges. For example, most of the surveys related to economy or health do not include questions about sexual orientation. So, if you fill up the forms, the questions are always about the gender with which a person identifies and not the orientation or the sexual preferences of that particular person. Apart from that, stigma and fear of discrimination might always reduce the willingness of LGBTQ people to correctly report their sexual orientation or gender identity on surveys. So, if you combine these two factors, they ultimately lead to the lack of data and hence deter the basic research. For example, in 2011 Indian census, which marked the first time that an other category was added to the male and female options on the question about sex. And this is a very important information from the perspective of prelims examination. 2011 Indian census marked the first time that an other category was added to the male and female options. And in essence, it provided a third gender category. But the result count of transgender people is thought by some observer to be unreliable. A total of 4,90,000 individuals of all ages reported the other option, or about just 0.04% of the Indian population of around 1.2 billion people. Can you believe it? In fact, many observers believe that figure to be an undercount or understatement given the unfamiliarity of the option. Concerns about the quality of answers quoted by enumerators and the likely underreporting by transgender people worried about revealing a stigmatized status to the government are some of the factors which might have resulted into this underreporting. So just 4.9 lakh people in India have come out as the transgenders, which is a way below as compared to the developed countries. And so it is a challenge to frame appropriate policies for the LGBTQ communities without the reliable and adequate data. As we have understood, because of the stigma attached to the sexual orientation, the LGBTQ people are relegated to the margins of society. This marginalization often excludes them from accessing basic services like education, like health, like housing, and even accessing the legal justice system. And so all these are basically out of the purview of a transgender or a person belonging to LGBTQ community in general. This marginalization and social exclusion often reflects itself in the form of exclusion from the educational network and educational system in India also. Because when you come out as an LGBTQ person, the harassment and violence by teachers and classmates and colleagues is very common. And that treatment reduces their ability to continue with their education. Apart from that, resources for investment in training or education by families might also be diminished for children who are gender non-conforming, which basically means that people who do not conform to the biological sex at birth, which is either male or female, they are known as people of gender non-conforming. Then if you're excluded and marginalized from society, and if you do not get enough education, of course your chances of doing well economically are diminished, and hence the economic deprivation. There is very pervasive discrimination in hiring, which basically results from low skill acquisition while at the time of education and vocational training. And since they already have very unequal access to education, this results in wage gap also. And final nail in the coffin is the legal injustice. So you knock on the doors of judiciary and you do not get justice, or in fact, you're not able to knock on the doors of the justice also. Despite homosexuality being decriminalized in India after the Section 377 was struck down, let us know in the comment section which was that important judgment which led to the striking down of Section 377. Section 377 has been decriminalized, but the laws in India still remain hostile and prejudicial towards the LGBTQ community in several aspects of the current debate, for example, about marriage, So a marriage cannot be registered if the two people do not belong to the opposite sex. So in India right now, in order to get your marriage registered, one person has to be male, another person has to be biologically female. Apart from marriage, the problems of adoption also are strongly tilted against LGBTQ communities. Then problems of surrogacy also hinder their parenthood. So you can see that in terms of legal sphere also, the people belonging to LGBT community, once they come out as LGBTQ, are not treated equal to the straight people. Now, in this regard, two important legal judgments are worth remembering. First, of course, is the Nalsa judgment of 2014, where the Supreme Court issued a sweeping judgment which held that transgender people should be legally recognized according to their gender identity, enjoy all fundamental rights, and receive special benefits in education and employment. Whereas in case of Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India 2018 judgment, the Supreme Court decriminalized Section 377 of IPC, which basically means decriminalization of homosexuality. And that the Section 377 was violative of right to freedom of life, privacy, and equality of sexual minorities.